There's a particular kind of evening that happens in a man's life, usually after 50 and sometimes earlier, when the house is quiet. The light from the window falls just right across the kitchen table, and he realizes he hasn't spoken to anyone in 3 days, and he feels relief. Not loneliness, relief. To the outside world, this might look like withdrawal, like something broke. But inside, something else is happening. He's not avoiding connection. He's preserving something he spent years trying to protect while performing in relationships that drained him dry. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer once observed that solitude is the fortress of the strong. And for men who've spent decades trying to make partnerships work, that fortress finally feels like home. These men don't hate women. They simply learned to see romance the way a retired magician sees a magic show from the back row. He knows where the trapdoor is. He knows how the card was forced. He appreciates the performance, but he no longer believes in the sorcery. And if this feels familiar to you, if you've ever felt more lonely inside a relationship than you do alone, there's something important hidden beneath this quiet shift. Stay with me. I want to tell you about a man I know. He's 73 now, lives in a small house with a dog and a garden he tends every morning. He was married twice. The first marriage lasted 14 years. The second, 9. Both ended not in explosions, but in slow erosions, tiny compromises that accumulated like dust until he couldn't recognize himself anymore. He told me once, over coffee, that the loneliest he ever felt was sitting across from someone at dinner, searching for something to say, knowing that whatever he said would be misunderstood or dismissed. He said the silence between them wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. It had weight. And when the second marriage ended, he expected to feel devastated. Instead, he felt lighter. He didn't date again, not because he was bitter, not because he gave up, but because he finally understood something most people spend their entire lives avoiding: that peace, real peace, doesn't come from finding the right person. It comes from no longer needing to perform for anyone. Schopenhauer wrote that life swings like a pendulum between pain and boredom, but he also believed that those who could step off the pendulum, who could find refuge in their own inner world, had discovered something rare, a kind of freedom most people never touch. This man found that freedom, and he's not alone. There's a quiet pattern emerging across the world, mostly invisible, mostly unspoken. Men in their 50s, 60s, 70s, men who spent decades trying to build partnerships, trying to be good husbands, good boyfriends, good companions, are walking away. Not in anger, not in protest, but in exhaustion. And what they're finding on the other side isn't emptiness, it's clarity. These men aren't broken. They're not damaged. They're not incapable of love. They simply reached a point where the cost of connection became higher than the reward, where every dinner felt like a performance, every conversation felt like a negotiation, every attempt at intimacy felt like work. And one day, they stopped trying. To outsiders, this looks like withdrawal, like giving up, like loneliness. But internally, it feels like the first full breath they've taken in years. Let me speak directly to you now. If you're a man who's been alone for years, maybe a decade, maybe longer, and people keep asking when you're going to get back out there, you know this feeling. You know the quiet frustration of trying to explain that you're not waiting for someone. You're not healing from someone. You're not avoiding anything. You're just done. Done performing. Done pretending. Done managing someone else's emotions while your own get buried. Done with the exhausting theatre of romance where you're expected to play a role you never auditioned for. And the strangest part, you're happier now than you were when you were trying. This isn't bitterness. It's not cynicism. It's something closer to wisdom. The kind of wisdom that only comes from years of watching the same patterns repeat, the same disappointments accumulate, the same promises dissolve. Schopenhauer believed that most human suffering comes from the blind, relentless will, the drive to want, to need, to pursue. and that the only escape from that suffering is to step back from the wanting itself, to find peace not in getting what you desire, but in no longer desiring it. That's what these men have done. They didn't lose the capacity for love. They lost the illusion that love, as it's sold to us, is the answer. Here's what most people never notice. These men aren't isolating. They're curating. They still have a few close friends, maybe one or two, people they can sit with in silence, people who don't demand performance, people who understand that sometimes the best conversation is no conversation at all. They still have routines, morning coffee, a walk, a book, a project in the garage, a show they watch at night with the dog curled up beside them. Small, quiet rituals that feel more meaningful than any grand romantic gesture ever did. They still feel deeply, but they've learned to feel on their own terms, in their own time, without the pressure of someone else's expectations shaping every emotion. And here's the part that sounds strange to people who've never experienced it. They feel more alive now than they did in relationships, because when you're no longer performing, when you're no longer managing someone else's moods, when you're no longer walking on eggshells or second-guessing every word, you finally have the energy to be yourself. Not the version of yourself that someone else needs, just yourself. And that version, it turns out, is enough. I knew another man, 62. He'd worked in construction his entire adult life, retired early because his body couldn't take it anymore. His wife left him 3 years before retirement, said he'd become emotionally unavailable. He didn't argue, he just signed the papers. For the first 6 months after she left, he waited for the loneliness to hit. He kept expecting to wake up one morning desperate for companionship, desperate to fill the silence, but it never came. Instead, he started noticing things. The way morning light moved across his kitchen floor, the sound of rain on the roof without someone talking over it, the freedom to eat dinner at 10 p.m. or not eat dinner at all, the relief of coming home to a space that stayed exactly as he left it. He told me he felt guilty at first, guilty for not missing her more, guilty for feeling relieved, guilty for enjoying the quiet. But over time, the guilt faded, and what replaced it was something he'd never felt in 40 years of relationships. Peace. Not the peace of resolution, not the peace of healing, but the peace of no longer having to try. Schopenhauer understood this. He wrote about the exhaustion that comes from the world's constant demands, the noise, the expectations, the performances we're forced to give just to exist among others. He believed that the only sanctuary from that exhaustion was the inner world, the place where no one else could reach, where you could finally stop performing and just be. That's where these men live now, in that sanctuary. There's a comment I read recently that stayed with me. A man, 80 years old, wrote, "I have lived the past 40 years alone with no female partner. I am a normal straight guy. I have, over time, learned all the lessons in the video. The video is very good and 100% correct. Peace be with you, single old men." 40 years. Think about that. 40 years of solitude. And at the end of it, not regret, not loneliness, but peace. Another man, 77, wrote simply, "Same here, and I am at peace." This is the part that confuses people. How can someone spend decades alone and call it peace? How can someone walk away from the promise of partnership and not feel like they're missing something? The answer is simple, but it requires a shift in perspective. These men aren't missing something. They're safeguarding something. They're safeguarding the quiet sanctuary they've built inside themselves. The space where they can think clearly, feel deeply, and exist without the constant noise of someone else's needs, expectations, and disappointments. They're safeguarding their energy. Because after years of giving it away, pouring it into relationships that drained more than they nourished, they finally understand that their energy is finite and precious and worth guarding. They're safeguarding their peace Because once you've tasted real peace, the kind that comes from no longer needing to prove yourself or perform for anyone, anything that threatens it becomes unbearable. One commenter put it perfectly: peace is addictive. Once a man experiences it, chaos is unbearable. That's the shift. That's the transformation. It's not that these men can't handle relationships. It's that they can't handle the chaos that so often comes with them. Before we continue, I want to pause here for a moment. If this is resonating with you, if you're recognizing yourself in these words, you're not alone in this quiet shift. There's a growing corner of the internet where people like you gather, not to complain, not to rage, but simply to be seen, to be understood, to know that choosing peace over partnership isn't a failure. It's a choice, a valid, intelligent, deeply human choice. Join us here. Share in the comments what part of this resonated most with you, because the conversation doesn't end with this video. It continues in the quiet reflections you carry with you after you close this screen. Let's continue, because what comes next is where the psychology becomes unmistakable. There's a difference between loneliness and solitude, and most people never learn it. Loneliness is the ache of wanting connection and not having it. It's the feeling of being surrounded by people and still feeling invisible. It's the hollow echo of a relationship where you're physically present but emotionally abandoned. Solitude is the choice to be alone. It's the deliberate creation of space where you can breathe, think, and exist without interference. It's not running away from people. It's running toward yourself. And here's the paradox that defines the lives of these men. They'd rather be alone and lonely than lonely in a relationship. Because loneliness in solitude is honest. It's clean. It doesn't come with the added weight of disappointment, resentment, or the exhausting performance of pretending everything is fine. Loneliness in a relationship, on the other hand, is suffocating. It's the worst kind of loneliness because it comes with the illusion that you shouldn't feel it. You're not supposed to feel alone when someone is right there beside you, but you do. And that gap between expectation and reality becomes unbearable. So these men choose solitude, not because they don't want connection, but because they've learned that bad connection is worse than no connection. And once you learn that lesson, you can't unlearn it. Think about the last time you were in a relationship, or the last time you tried. Think about the moments when you felt most yourself. Were they the moments when you were together, or were they the moments when you were finally alone? For most of these men, the answer is clear. They felt most alive when they could finally stop performing, when they could take off the mask, when they could exist without the constant pressure of someone else's gaze, someone else's judgment, someone else's needs. That's not a failure of love. That's a recognition of reality. Schopenhauer spent much of his life alone. He was famously difficult, famously pessimistic, but he was also deeply, profoundly honest about the human condition. He believed that most people are driven by a blind will, a relentless, unconscious force that pushes them to want, to need, to pursue, without ever asking why. And he believed that the only escape from that will, the only path to peace, was through contemplation, through stepping back from the wanting, through finding refuge in the inner world, where the noise of the external world couldn't reach. That's what these men have done. They've stepped off the pendulum. They've stopped chasing the illusion that the right person will complete them, fix them, save them. They've stopped believing in the sorcery, and in doing so, they've found something most people spend their entire lives searching for: themselves. Let me be clear about something. This isn't about hating women. It's not about blaming anyone. It's not about declaring that all relationships are doomed or that partnership is a lie. It's about recognizing that for some men, after years of trying, after years of compromising, after years of performing, the cost became too high, and they made a choice to prioritize peace over partnership, solitude over performance, clarity over chaos. And that choice, as quiet and invisible as it is one of the most powerful acts of self-preservation a person can make. Because it says, I matter, My energy matters. My peace matters. And I will no longer sacrifice those things for the sake of someone else's expectations. There's a metaphor I keep coming back to. It's from one of those comments I mentioned earlier, the one about the retired magician. He said, he views women the way a retired magician views a magic show from the back row of the theatre. He knows where the trap door is. He knows how the card was forced. He appreciates the performance, but he no longer believes in the sorcery. That's it. That's the entire psychology in one image. These men aren't angry. They're not bitter. They're not even disappointed anymore. They're just done believing. They've seen the trick too many times. They've watched the same patterns play out in different relationships with different people. They've learned that the magic isn't real. It's a performance. A beautiful, convincing, exhausting performance. And they've decided they'd rather sit in the back row, in the quiet, where they can see clearly, than be on stage performing a role they never wanted. So what does this mean for you? If you're a man who's been alone for years, and you've felt the weight of judgment from friends, family, society, if you've been told you're giving up, that you're broken, that you need to try harder, I want you to hear this. You're not broken. You're not giving up. You're choosing peace. And that choice, as quiet and invisible as it is valid. It's intelligent. It's deeply, profoundly human. You don't owe anyone a performance. You don't owe anyone a relationship. You don't owe anyone an explanation for why you're happier alone than you ever were trying to be someone you're not. You've earned this peace. After years of trying, after years of draining yourself, after years of performing, you've earned the right to step off the stage and just be. And if that means spending your evenings in a quiet house with a dog and a book and a cup of coffee, with no one to answer to and no one to perform for, then that's not loneliness. That's freedom. Schopenhauer once wrote that the man who is self-sufficient, who needs nothing from the external world, is the richest man alive. Not because he has everything, but because he needs nothing. That's what these men have become, self-sufficient. Not because they're incapable of love, but because they no longer need it to feel whole. And in a world that constantly tells us we're incomplete without someone else, that's a radical act. It's a quiet rebellion, a refusal to participate in the endless cycle of wanting, pursuing, disappointing, repeating. It's the decision to step off the wheel and build something different, something simpler, something that doesn't require constant maintenance, constant negotiation, constant performance. A life that fits. There's one more thing I want to say before we close. If you're watching this and you're not there yet, if you're still in the middle of trying, still in the middle of performing, still in the middle of hoping that the next relationship will be different, I'm not here to tell you to stop. But I am here to tell you this. Pay attention to how you feel. Pay attention to whether you feel more alive in the relationship or more alive when you're alone. Pay attention to whether the person beside you makes you feel seen or makes you feel like you're constantly performing. Pay attention to whether the peace you feel when plans cancel is stronger than the joy you feel when they don't. Because those feelings are telling you something. And if you ignore them long enough, you'll wake up one day and realize you've spent years, maybe decades, trying to make something work that was never meant to work. And by then, the exhaustion will be so deep, the only thing left to do is walk away. But here's the truth that no one talks about. Walking away isn't the end. It's the beginning. It's the beginning of clarity, of peace, of finally understanding who you are when you're not trying to be what someone else needs. And for men who've spent years drained by trying, that beginning feels like coming home, not to a person, but to themselves. And that, more than any relationship, is worth safeguarding. Yet even in this hard-won peace, there's a question that lingers. A quiet tension that doesn't go away just because you've chosen solitude. Because once you've stepped off the stage, once you've stopped performing, once you've built this sanctuary of silence, what happens when the world outside starts to feel not just distant, but invisible? When the relief of being alone begins to blur into something else entirely? That's the edge most men don't talk about. The line between peace and disappearance. And it's thinner than you think. We'll explore that line in the next video. Because the psychology of solitude doesn't end with choosing it. It deepens when you realize what you might be losing without even noticing. A quiet corner of the internet for people who choose solitude over half-hearted connections.